I would like to give you all a tour. There are so many plants here. So just to start off, behind me, this tree here is a pawpaw, which is a natural fruit. It's almost like a mango banana. It's a yellow custardy flesh. It's green on the outside, but has a flavor kind of like bubblegum. It's really delicious. It's one of my absolute favorites. Right now it just has these teeny little buds that are like a red velvet. They're very soft and velvety. They haven't opened up yet. They're about to bloom, and the fruit will ripen in September. So if you're ever on campus in September, I will be bringing some pawpaws from my property. They grow wild in the woods along creeks and rivers, and they're super abundant and delicious. Their shelf life is very short, so they're not sold in stores, and they're very hard to find. So if you're able to come to campus and try some, you gotta try it. Then on the ground here, we have the golden ragwort, which is actually a native ground cover. Typically, it's very short and just covers the ground. As you can see, it has filled this entire bed full of these plants. They have a pretty purple undercolor underneath the leaves. And of course, in the spring, they have these golden flowers. I've seen students take graduation photos around here because the gold and green looks really good with their, graduation gowns. They've just started budding right now. I'll probably finish this video next week as well, when the pawpaws are probably blooming, and then this whole area will just be all full of these golden flowers. Like most low to the ground perennials, this flowering stem, once it goes to seed, the seeds are these little fluffies that just fly in the wind and they spread everywhere, which kind of gets invasive, actually. I find them all over the garden. It's funny that a native plant can also have invasive tendencies. But the stem would just die. Of course, the root and the leaves near the ground stay alive, but this stem, once it's done flowering and going to seed, I actually have to cut them down and clean the area, or else it just looks really terrible. So that's pretty common for non-woody perennials, right, is that the top dies back, usually after blooming and going to seed, and then the roots stay alive and grow back. So that's really common of perennials, that they do take some maintenance. Typically you just do like a chop and drop or let it be, but for access and aesthetics, we like to clear those out. We do have a couple of bike racks here in the food forest. This large tree here is actually a crab apple that was originally planted when the Innovation Hall was built. Before this was a garden. This entire garden was a lawn, 2012 and before, and so these decorative crabapple trees were planted. They are technically safe to eat, but they're not really edible. They're not tasty. They're dry and just chalky, but they're related to apples. So what I've done is actually called grafting. So you can see my labels up on these sticks up here. So I went and bought some, they're called scions, or scion wood. It's basically a young stick or twig from a fruiting apple tree from a nearby apple orchard farmer. And you can see how I've cut the stumps here, and then I stick either, here is a side graft or on the tip of the fresh cut, and basically the veins of the plant reconnect and heal and become one. It's almost like a heart transplant surgery for plants. It's super cool. As long as plants are related and closely enough related, they will take on branches from other plants. So the crab apple mother tree is taking on these apple stem branches that I'm hoping will one day form edible apple fruits, which is going to be really cool. So they have survived. Grafting is very tricky. It's kind of like every horticulturist's goal, when you're working with plants, to take on that challenge of grafting. It's super fun. We have a lot of decorative carex grasses here. There's some daylilies that are actually edible flowers that are very commonly landscaped. Very tasty raw flowers. You can also cook the buds. I've heard that sauteing them can be pretty tasty. Oh, this looks like a deer footprint. Let's cover that up. We have some of these carex grasses. This is that golden ragwort spreading and just going everywhere. I did not plant the ragwort in any of these beds, and it's just those seeds. They're related to dandelions. Dandelions, when you blow on them, you make a wish and the seeds fly. A lot of the aster or sunflower family plants have those little fluffies on their seeds. Here we have an Asian pear tree. These fruit don't typically ripen on the tree. The Asian pear is going to be spherical and round compared to like your European pear, which we have down the hill there. So these are blossoming right now, absolutely gorgeous. I recommend smelling flowers. I think the pollen actually reduces seasonal allergies. And my nose kind of acts like a pollinator. So yeah, we do get fruit on these trees. They just have to be picked early on, and then they can ripen on your countertop. Absolutely gorgeous right now. Most of these trees were planted in 2013, so they're about 7 years old now, so they've been producing for a couple years. We do have some daffodils as well. They're not native. They're produced in like the Netherlands and Denmark region. They smell so good. They're one of my favorites. We've planted them in circles around each fruit tree to try and attract pollinators. Their smell and vibrant color is going to attract your native bees and honeybees and other pollinators to come and help pollinate the fruit trees. As you may know, you don't get fruit if you don't have pollinators pollinating the flowers, so that's really important. So these smell really good and look really great, but they also serve a purpose. So this site was actually designed using a technique called permaculture, which is a term with two words, permanent and agriculture. Oh, here's more of my apple graphs. So permaculture is a method of growing food in more permanent ways so that there's less labor involved, right? That's why we call this the food forest. We're making food in a way that a forest would, right? You don't have to fertilize or water a forest, it just produces food for you. So by using these all perennial plants, meaning that they're permanent. Once you plant them, they're going to survive the winter and grow back, and they're going to get bigger and bigger every year and produce more and more food for you. So having, there's multiple techniques in permaculture. It's actually a whole concept. It can even be thought of as like a way of life, even a way of thinking. But typically, as a permaculturist, you would take a class, the Permaculture Design Certification course. And the main point of it is to use intelligent design to create a site that will take care of itself. You're putting plants in the right place, you're putting them in guilds that help one another, and you're looking at your garden as like a system of inputs and outputs that work very cyclically and flow together. There's a lot that goes into it, but one technique is called stacking functions. So having aesthetics, having stormwater erosion prevention, having, promoting pollinators, having food, did I already say aesthetics, right? Or maybe you might be able to use a plant for paper or fiber. There's multiple purposes. So stacking functions is a great way to have multiple uses in one plant and in one area. Another permaculture technique we have is called key lining, or a berm and swale technique. So on this inclined area of the garden, we have these kind of like this hole and this bump. So we have a swale and then a berm. So you can kind of see it right here. They're kind of flattened over time, but originally that was the first thing we did. You actually measure the exact perpendicular line to the incline, and it helps to store water. So typically, when it rains, that water is going to run down the incline, take with it all of your soil. Right? We've mentioned how many issues stormwater creates for the environment, for aquatic life. It's a really big issue, and especially for a gardener, that stormwater is going to take all your good soil away, and then your plants have bare roots and they can die, and then that water is gone, they're going to dry out. So basically, this swale or hole you dig, and then you put all the soil downhill and make a berm, or kind of like a bump, and that's perpendicular to the incline, so that the water collects in the swale and the berm's going to stop it. And if you make it perfectly on the perfect key line, perpendicular, that swale will fill up with water, and that water will slowly infiltrate into the soil rather than running off like stormwater typically does, creating a lot of issues. Then we put comfrey on the berm. So this little plant right here is called comfrey. I like to call it the mascot of permaculture. The root is also known as knit bone. It's medicinal. It's used to heal bones. I've given comfrey salves to people with broken bones, and it's healed very fast. Doctors were very impressed, and it also is a nutrient accumulator. It also helps to break up the clay. So the roots are really, really deep. They're really resilient. They're almost impossible to get rid of once established. And they grow really tall and really abundant. They have gorgeous purple flowers that the pollinators absolutely love. And it's going to keep this berm stable. It's going to prevent stormwater runoff. It's going to break up that clay. And it's going to have really deep tap roots, kind of like a carrot, right? That one solid root. It's going to pull nutrients from really, really deep and bring it into their leaves. So typically do a chop and drop. All these dead leaves dropping at the surface are going to release those nutrients that are very deep. Most plants actually have roots that are very shallow or sideways along the surface of the ground. These plants, like these tap roots and comfrey, have very deep roots that can really penetrate that compressed clay that we have in Virginia and grab all those stored nutrients that most plants can't get to. So it's actually building soil. As I mentioned, building soil is extremely important. Look at this beautiful thyme! These are called steppables. They're some of my favorite. You can actually step on them and they won't die from a little bit of foot traffic. These are originally little 4-inch pots that I've planted, and they're really good ground covers, so they actually spread in all directions and they get bigger. And I'm smelling it because this is actually a lemon thyme, and it smells so good. This is also edible, so you could totally take this home, use it to season chicken, or really in any kind of Italian type dish. It's really going to add that extra flavor that's going to impress whoever you're cooking for. Oh, here we have some of the bee balm coming up. This is, ooh, it smells so good. Another perennial that's going to get 4 feet tall in late spring, and then those stems I have to cut back because then it dies back and then it regrows. So here's this new growth growing back. It's very scented, and bee balm is in like lip balm kind of. They have beautiful flowers that bees and pollinators absolutely love. It's also highly medicinal. I've used it to get rid of headaches before. Especially take the leaves and put it in your water bottle. You don't have to have hot water to make like a cold brew tea, basically. And it really helps to get rid of headaches and stomach aches, flus and colds and things. I mean, I don't memorize every medicinal property of these plants because usually the list of healing properties is so long that I don't have them all memorized. Typically a plant will help to heal multiple ailments. We also have some burdock here. Burdock you might know as a kind of like a weed in forested areas. It's got a seed burr that really sticks to your clothes. It's got like a little Velcro hook on it. That's actually how they invented Velcro, was from viewing plant seeds up close. But when it's young, you actually dig up the tuber, right, that root, and it's actually edible. I know a vegetarian restaurant in Centerville called Lotus, and they have several dishes with burdock root. It's really, it's kind of like stringy, kind of really chewy, but it's a nice texture to have. Like when you're eating, it's nice and chewy. It's pretty pleasant. We have so many more plants here right now. There's a lot of really common weeds growing. This is called groundsel or bitter watercress. This is actually an edible green, so not that it doesn't taste all that great. Actually has a nice kind of a garlicky flavor to it. It's pretty good. We also have chickweed, which will have little tiny white flowers on it, also edible. I mean, kind of tastes like you're eating a plant, right? It's really not that amazing. This is also another edible plant. This is called purple nettle. It's got these cute little purple flowers in it. It's in the mint or Lamiaceae family. You can tell because it has a square stem. And this is also edible. Really great for pollinators. So all 3 of these weeds, very relative term, come up in the cooler season, so in early spring and late fall. You can see that they're really covering all of this bare soil. Ooh, these ones are really fuzzy too, they feel nice. I call this a low priority weed. I actually don't remove these because they're gonna die back once it gets hot in April, and they're never gonna choke out my intentional species. If anything, they're actually serving multiple functions to attract and feed pollinators, to keep the soil covered, act as an emergency food source. These are packed with vitamins and nutrients. Chickweed also only grows in healthy soil, so it's basically telling us that we do have really good soil. We have a mulberry tree right here. They just show up. This tree just showed up. It's funny. We actually had a tree that had died from an aphid attack and a bacterial disease hitting it all at once, and there was nothing I can do. It died. Right at that same moment, mulberry showed up and grew in its place. These mulberries grow really fast. You can see how big they are. It's got this beautiful gold-colored bark. Oh, you can see little green buds coming back. They have really delicious berries in like mid-spring and June. Only for about a week or two can you get the berries. They ripen and then they drop and they're done very fast, very quick. But they're so delicious. They look just like blackberries, except a little bit longer. Some of them can get about this long, very dark purple, and they're just super delicious. They're really high in potassium, so they're really good for you as well. There's, we have some Chinese dates here. So dates are actually more like a desert-loving plant, would not be able to survive the frost. But in regions of China, in that area, they have similar temperate climates to us, so they get snow. Where the temperate meaning that the deciduous, right, the leaves are going to fall and they're going to come back. So this tree doesn't have its leaves back yet. It does have these little spikes on it, but it actually produces dates. So they're like kind of small, roundish, red fruit. It had its first fruiting season last year, and it was like a super sweet kind of apple, kind of crunchy, bright red with a white flesh on the inside. Super delicious. The Latin name is ziziphus. Kind of a fun name. We have two of them as well. We have a ton of elderberries in this garden. They've spread like crazy. So most plants spread from animals eating the berries, and then the birds will fly around and poop the berries, and then the seeds grow from there. It's a really good adaptation when you're a plant and you can't move and you want to spread to cover large regions. So the elderberries are very attractive to birds, and they just poop the seeds everywhere. So originally we only had like 3 or 5 elderberries, and now we have like 50 of them here. They create pretty large shrubs. This is a woody stem, so we would not cut this back too much because it grows back from the woody stem, as you can see, unlike the lower to the ground perennials. You may have heard of elderberry, also known as